Hello and thank you for joining me for another Alex on Tech and ITY video. I'm here with Harsha Deshpande. He's the Managing Director of Accenture Technology. Welcome to the program.
Hi Alex, how are you going?
Good, good. Now Harsha, I thought before we get into more detail, could you please tell us a bit about your role at Accenture and the work you do in app development and open source programming and how you got into this field?
Yep, so Harsha Deshpande, Accenture Managing Director for Accenture Technology. I lead the custom dev practice for Accenture for ANZ, and that pretty much means any kind of custom app dev work that we do across a number of our clients across different industries, that work comes out of my group. And I also lead the open source alliance practice for Accenture for ANZ. So any kind of open source partners that we have within the ecosystem, either globally or locally, I'll work with those open source partners to bring in their solutions into our clients.
And actually, whilst I'm thinking about it, I mean, what are sort of some of the custom apps and some of the things you're working on in this, helping companies to achieve or doing for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at it right now, there's a whole big renaissance around custom app dev, right? A lot of our emerging tech capabilities that are coming out, they're all built around open source technologies, and a lot of it is custom developed.
A lot of APIs.
Correct, a lot of APIs. Could be even things like digital assistants. So things like Alexa, Amazon Alexa, Google Home, they're all custom developed in the back end, and there's kind of integration layers at the back. And that work and that capability effectively comes out of my group in my area.
And I guess in 2018, you must be doing more custom dev apps and app development than ever before.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that growth and that whole ability to custom build things, to create bespoke solutions on commodity platforms being delivered by the tech giants, that's increased significantly. So we're seeing kind of this shift away from just having packaged applications and adding things like bespoke platforms on top of those packaged platforms to create something unique that's really customized for your application, for your customers or your employees.
And here we are in 2018 and we still have companies talking about people on their digital transformation journey or even updating, like they were transforming 5 or 10 years ago, and everything they've done is kind of, it's not that it's out of date, but technology's moved along and they're sort of having to either start again or they're starting for the first time. And again, it must be the same with apps. I mean, there must be even huge companies out there who still haven't really done it yet, or they tried it some years ago and they really realized we've got to start again. And this is still a huge growth area.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, right? When I first started my career about 14 years ago or so, we used to do IT strategy sessions for clients for about 5 to 10 years. That was kind of the roadmap. Whereas if you do an IT strategy for a company now, that's kind of 2 years, you're pretty much doing okay.
Yeah.
Really, the event horizon of how far you can predict has almost moved down to a 6-month horizon now. And what we're seeing is that people are starting to understand that capability that you're developing might become out of date very quickly and very soon.
Sure.
And that ability to adapt your strategy as you go along, that's probably the more important thing.
Sure. And it sort of makes all those 5-year plans you see from some of those, I don't know, communist countries or something seem a bit crazy, because I mean, who can plan for 5 years when things are changing in 6 months, as you've just described?
Yeah, that's right. Well, I mean, if you look at the tech giants, they're pretty much launching a new product or a service every 2 weeks.
Yeah.
It's almost, even for me in the industry, it's very hard for me to even keep up with those things, let alone the customer on the street, your employees, and these larger organizations that are trying to effectively catch up, use some of those commodity platforms that are being delivered, and then effectively build out solutions on top of those platforms. And that's a constant challenge, and I think that's just going to increase at a much more rapid pace going forward in the next few years.
Now, one of the things that you've been working on, as we can see in the background, is your technology vision for 2018, and we can see there's 5 different trends which we'll get into. But a lot of what you are doing must naturally be related to the topics within this Tech Vision 2018. And you say that these trends are essential to the business success in today's digital economy. So please give us an overview.
Yeah, so the Tech Vision, I guess, is something that we produce every year. So it's not a vision statement for 5 to 10 years down the line. It's something that's very relevant for this year. And effectively, the technology trends evolve every year. So they're not revolutionary in nature, right? So you'll see kind of the 5 trends for this year. The overarching theme is Intelligent Enterprise Unleashed. So you've kind of seen the growth of things like AI and use of data to drive insights within the organization. We're starting to find that that's really a predominant theme this year for a lot of the large companies, because they've got a large treasure trove of data within their enterprise, they're starting to drive insights and decisions off the back of that.
Which, I mean, companies have always had this data, but they never really had the tools to data mine it as effectively as they, and with such granularity as today.
Yeah, correct. And the growth of AI over the last year, and if you look at last year's team, it was similar in nature. Is the ability to really drive complex AI models off the data that's already within their enterprise or within that ecosystem. That's really taken shape over the last year.
Does Accenture have its own AI engine that it licenses to its customers and yourselves, or are you using someone else's technology?
No, so we tend to always be agnostic. So we tend to use all of our partner solutions, primarily guys like Google, Amazon, and Microsoft, I guess our three key partners, and we'll use their solutions to effectively build solutions and platforms for our clients using those technologies.
And it probably also depends on what underlying technologies your client's using. If they're a Microsoft shop or a Google shop, you'll go in that direction.
Yeah, correct, exactly right.
Yeah, now I can see you've got some other trends. There's extended reality.
Yeah, so let me go through the five key trends. So the first trend is called citizen AI. And what that's talking about is really how do you use AI for good. Yeah. So as AI starts
avoiding Skynet.
Correct, exactly right. But what's actually happening is interesting is over the last couple of years, as we're starting to see AI has become a lot more complex, what we call strong AI or AGI, so artificial general intelligence. What's starting to happen is our ability to understand why the AI has made a certain decision. That's becoming more and more complicated. So if you take a simple example, so recently, last year, overseas, we built a mortgage advisor bot, right? So this effectively takes in your qualifications, it takes in how much you get paid, some of the other background details, and it gives you back mortgage advice. So what product you should choose, is your mortgage application accepted? But if you think about it from a compliance and a regulatory standpoint, you need to be able to explain why the AI has recommended certain product, or if your mortgage application has been rejected. You can't simply go back to a customer and say, well, sorry, your application was rejected because the AI said so. Yeah. You need to be able to have the ability to explain why that AI has made a certain decision, and whether it's made it on the right set of data, and in fact, it's not biased. And that ability to do that in citizen AI, that's what we're talking about. So while there's a lot of discussion out there around AI is going to change the world, not enough people are talking about these systems with this idea or concept of human in the loop. So how do you make sure a person is always in the loop, making sure the right decisions are being made, the right recommendations are being made. If you don't design it from the beginning, then it becomes very hard for you to add it in.
It's like trying to add security in after you develop your system. But I was just at a conference overseas, and they were talking about the concept of explainable AI, and to avoid this black box effect where this box makes a decision and you can't get a reason as to why. And that's just not acceptable in the modern era. You must get the reason so that you can double check the machine. You can't just rely on the machine for everything. So that's a great initiative.
The other problem is also around bias in data, right? So the third theme is actually data veracity. And what we tend to talk about there is how do you make sure that unconscious bias or even bias that's being introduced from outside of your organization isn't manipulating the data that's being used to drive the insights or even the AI models. And a simple example of that might be something like, and locally in New South Wales, someone recently released a career advisor bot. So what they did was it takes in a bunch of your qualifications, your interests and things, and then it gives you back some kind of insights around what type of career you should choose. And what they did was, in order to train the AI, they actually trained it on kind of 8 to 10 years worth of historic data. But what they found once they released the bot is that it was more likely to give recommendations for men like firemen or surgeon and doctors, but for women it wasn't. When they looked under the covers, the reason for that was because there was inherent gender bias in the data set that used, even though it was just 10 years old. And the challenge with that scenario is there's no way an AI will know if something is unconscious bias or if something is a pattern in the data.
Not one of today's AIs anyway, maybe a future one will, but that's way down the track.
Correct, exactly right. But even if you flip that story on its head, right? You saw the recent example of the Uber self-driving car in the US ran over a pedestrian fatally, right? So if you looked at that scenario, when you're driving a car, Alex, when you're going down the street, say you see a mum with a pram on one side of the road, and you see a teenage kid on the other side of the road.
It's the famous ethical question about self-driving cars.
Well, if you actually think about, when you're driving, you'll think about the mum with the pram, very unlikely to cross the street in front of your car, right? Or run a red light.
But the teenager with the headphones on.
Absolutely, right? And then what happens if you effectively strip out all the gender bias out of these data sets. In the self-driving car scenario, that's not a bias, that's actually a pattern. You know that there's a higher risk profile associated with a teenage kid, likely a boy, versus a mum with a pram.
Yeah.
And those types of complexities, I don't think enough people are kind of talking about it and really progressing around how they would filter out that data before they feed into these AI models.
It's like, it's almost a little bit like you get the cleaner around, you've got to clean for the cleaner so that he doesn't think you're a really messy person. You've got to sanitize the data for the AI so it makes the right decisions. And
that's right.
Yeah, it's crazy how much you have to think about, but this is the reality of it.
And there's no other way to do this except using humans at the moment. So they're using things like Amazon Turk, which is effectively, it's a farm in India of people sitting behind keyboards, working out when something is biased in data, when something isn't.
It's the same as the mechanical Turk. There's a human
it is
inside.
Actually the mechanical Turk. It's exactly what it is. That's where the name comes from.
So well, that's right. Well, it has to be. So number 2 is extended reality.
Yeah. So number 2 is extended reality, and it's called the end of distance because what we're starting to see is, while VR and AR have been around for a few years, with the price point decreasing significantly, we're starting to see applications for those capabilities really starting to come about a lot more in enterprise sectors. So primarily being used for things like training. So a really great local example is the New Zealand Firefighting Service released a VR app where they actually used a fireproof GoPro camera and they went through a burning building to show people what it's like to try and escape out of that burning building. But if you take that same example and you took it a step further and you said, well, let's have the firefighters put on all the gear, don all the kit, and then let's put on the VR app and see what they feel like, what their response rate's like, are they struggling, are they reacting well, heart rate, exactly. And those types of scenarios, to be able to use things like VR or even AR to simulate those things for training situations, I think is starting to really take shape.
Yeah, I mean, in Australia we talk about the tyranny of distance. It was one of the famous writers who spoke about that. And yes, extended reality can certainly help to end that. I mean, teleportation will absolutely end it, but we're not quite there yet either.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at Australia as a pretty unique geography, right? I mean, a lot of our population is really centered around the East Coast, Eastern Seaboard, but then we have a lot of locations that are out there in the remote area. While the telcos are all investing in 5G networks and things, a lot of that capability is still going to be focused around the population areas. So that last theme that we've got, which is Trend 5, which is around Internet of Thinking, is taking that same concept and idea of how do you bridge that distance, not just from an AR and VR standpoint, but from a data standpoint. So, last few years we've been seeing Internet of Things really take shape, which is all about deploying a whole bunch of dumb sensors out there in the ecosystem that are collecting data. How do you start to put smarts into those sensors and devices themselves? So how do you take your AI or machine learning model that you've built that's in your core, you take it out to somewhere like a farm or a mining site or an oil and gas refinery that's out in the middle of nowhere, which may not have network connectivity, may not have a machine core back to it, that it can communicate back to. And that concept of taking those ideas and those devices out into the field and having them be the ability to effectively provide intelligence and manipulation of data on top of the raw data that they're taking in. That's the key trend behind Internet of Thinking.
And there must be like edge computers and some intelligence built into the device, so that some on-device processing can happen rather than just sending it all up to the cloud. So when the cloud gets it, it's sort of pre-processed.
Yeah, that's right. And that's exactly right. So that concept is called edge computing or fog computing. And we're starting to see kind of last couple of years, most companies have really focused on building all the intelligence back to the core, building all the data, bringing it back into the core, back into kind of the mothership, right? And with this trend, we're actually seeing the opposite effect. We're starting to see people think about, well, how do you distribute the data out there? How do you, once you build an AI or machine learning model, how do you keep it up to date but still be sent out to the field?
It's that non-stop cycle in computing of centralized and decentralized computing models.
Correct.
The dumb terminal, the smart supercomputer, back to dumb terminal. I mean, it just keeps going. That cycle never seems to stop.
Absolutely.
And now it's heading back.
We're in the other
going back the other direction again.
Correct. That's right.
Like the tides going in and out, it's the same thing. Then you've also got data veracity and frictionless business. So tell us quickly about
that. So frictionless business is effectively this trend around using some of the capability that we've seen over the last number of years. So things like cloud, blockchain, microservices, API enablement, to really create an ecosystem around you that's effectively going to help you succeed in your business. And a great example of that is something that NVIDIA launched last year, right, called the NVIDIA Drive platform, which is for autonomous cars. When we're talking about it, what NVIDIA did was they thought, hey, you know, all these car companies need to go off and create their own car platforms. They're not going to be able to create on-chip devices that can do all that processing. But then you've also got this problem of no one's talking about the simple thing, which is vehicle-to-vehicle communication, right? So if you're driving, for example, Alex, you know, you're a technologist, so you might drive a Google car and I might drive an Audi because I'm a traditionalist. And eventually both those cars are on the road, rather than the cars trying to work out where each other's going. The cars could just talk to each other.
One giant mesh network.
Correct. And if you have a platform in the middle that's kind of outside of that ecosystem, not competing, but providing that ability to create that vehicle-to-vehicle communication, that's where NVIDIA is seeing a real market for themselves, right? And that ability to kind of exploit a niche in the market, create an ecosystem around you, that's really what frictionless businesses is starting to talk about.
Sure. And then obviously Veracity, I mean, garbage in, garbage out. But obviously, it's this importance of trust is obviously deeper and more meaningful than that. So briefly tell us about that.
Yeah, so data veracity. I mean, I mentioned the career advisor bot, right? But one of the big problems with data veracity at the moment is how is
fake news?
Yeah, fake news, right? I mean, we were talking about this before the whole Cambridge Analytica Facebook scandal even erupted. You know, you saw Mark Zuckerberg's New Year's resolution was, let's change Facebook, let's change the way news feeds are presented, let's reduce the advertising. It's because he realized the need, right? He said, if people don't trust my platform, well, then I have no product. And that ability to really create a nice, intimate, trusted relationship, that's what Facebook is about. If you're not exploiting that, or not exploiting, but not utilizing that, then you effectively don't have a platform or a product. And that ability to make sure that the data that you're providing is trusted, both within your organization and outside to your customers, that's become fundamentally key.
I think the problem for Facebook was that the data was certainly trusted. It's just that nobody trusted Facebook would look after their data, and the data is being misused. But look, that's a totally different thing. And obviously, with APIs, the information you're getting from your partners or giving to your partners or your clients and vice versa, it all has to be trusted. Otherwise, things just won't work out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Now, obviously you've got these technology visions. They evolve every year. New things pop out of left field. I mean, blockchain. Who would have thought 10 years ago?
Yeah, that's right.
The word blockchain didn't exist 10 years ago. Maybe it did, but certainly not in the. I mean, I hear ads on the radio. Blockchain conference. So it's incredible how that has actually become just a part of their everyday language. So, with all of this latest 2018 trends in mind, where do you see Australian and global businesses, approaching all these trends today? Obviously, you want businesses to be fully aware of these trends, whether they're your customers or not. But how far are most businesses from achieving this today?
Yeah. So I think for Australian businesses, again, I was talking about we have a unique ability in the market to kind of use the capability that we have here locally, right? So the ability for us to have kind of ability to go off and in the remote sites, create those intelligent machines. There's a really great local example of a company called Yield Plus, which effectively does ag tech, right? So
what's it called again?
It's called Yield Plus.
Yield Plus, yeah, which is what you want when you're
a
processor manufacturer or a farmer, you want yield.
And what they effectively end up doing is that they created all these sensors that they put out into the farming sites themselves, right? And they collect lots of data, soil humidity, acidity, and those types of things. But that's not the amazing thing. What they did was they actually used the data on that platform to provide farmers in remote locations the ability to create a 7-day forecast that's specific for their farm. And if you look at all these remote farming sites out there, most of them are hundreds of kilometers away from the nearest town. So,
and the nearest Bureau of Meteorology sensor as well.
That's right. So the weather data that they get is completely pointless. It's pretty useless. So that ability to create a really unique value proposition, localized weather forecast for these farmers, I think that those types of scenarios, we're starting to see a lot of local businesses use commodity platforms from these tech giants to create something that's unique for the Australian market. And I think those types of examples could be marketed to other countries and other geographies around the world as well.
But just in general, I mean, with all these trends, are a lot of Australian businesses, way behind on implementing this sort of thing? Are they still lacking the understanding of these trends? you must have companies coming to you saying, help us understand, or your clients, you must be saying to them, look, these are the things that you should be doing, and if you're not doing them, then you're stepping behind. I mean, the other question that dovetails within that is how close to 100% is Accenture in actually implementing all of this within its own businesses?
Yeah, so I mean, Accenture being I guess a services company, some of the trends don't quite apply to us as well as, say, a manufacturing industry might.
I mean, it's horses for courses, but even
correct.
So.
But even if you look at it, so we've got a connected platform as a service, which is what we use. So keeping on with that IoT theme, which we use for IoT information. We're currently looking at integrating that platform into our digital workplace offering. So when you go into any of these offices in Accenture, things like meeting rooms, as you're navigating around the office using things like Beacon or Alexa to navigate around the office, all that's going to be implemented into that platform itself. So effectively what we're doing is using that Internet of Thinking team and then applying it to ourselves as customer one. And we're starting to see that quite a bit. Recently, just a couple of days ago, I actually got pinged on Skype by a bot that we've launched, which is a bot for career counselors to get feedback from their, so career counselor is effectively like a mentor at Accenture. And you kind of get feedback from the people that you mentor on how you're performing. And what that bot captures over Skype is effectively the ability for you to get some feedback anonymously from the people that you mentor. Now, rather than sending out an email, getting people to fill out a form, this is a pretty simple conversation.
It's like a live chat box.
It's a live chat box,
to somebody at a company.
And the bot effectively synthesizes all the data, makes it anonymous, then sends it back to that person or gathers that information. And that ability to do that is effectively what we're starting to see. And then how you use that data is effectively and making sure that it's still anonymous and things. That's effectively the theme of Citizen AI. So in a way, we're kind of applying that to ourselves.
And I mean, what sort of response are you getting from the marketplace for this? Are you having to go out to tell customers this is available, or are you getting now people coming to you saying, we've heard about this, we want to know more, we're keen to implement?
Yeah, I mean, a bit of both. I think a lot of projects out there are already starting to use or exploit things like AI, things like IoT, and what's happening is as we start some of those projects, we're dovetailing behind to say, well, have you thought about this? Have you considered this?
You're trying to get them to do it at that implementation phase, rather
exactly
than bolting it on at the end, and it's almost too late.
You talked about explainable AI being needed to be done kind of at the beginning, the inception phase. Well, that's effectively what we're trying to do, is making sure people understand that, hey, this AI is ultimately going to represent your brand when it's out there in the marketplace, right? That's effectively your company's brand name at stake. Do you want to make sure that you're putting in the right steps in place so that you can work out whether the decisions it's making, recommendations, the interactions are going to be favorable to your brand and your company?
Now, you've given us quite a lot of examples today, which is really cool, but I'm wondering, of all the things you've told us today, and even if there's something you haven't mentioned, which is sort of the most game-changing of all of these trends for you for this year?
Yeah, so I think for me, it's probably the one that's the least sexy out of it, which is data veracity. Because I think as AI is starting to become so much more predominant in the marketplace, I don't think many people are really thinking about that data, as we spoke about before, whether it's filtered, whether it's making the right decisions, or the AI that's built on top of that data is making the right decisions.
Sure.
And you've got so many challenges with that data, because if it's a large data set, you've got humans trawling through it to try and work out whether there's things like bias, there's manipulation of the data, is it out of date, how you're collating it. That's really a big problem. And I don't think it's something that's really discussed. Everyone goes after the big shiny toys, which is
the
AI,
stuff with IoT.
AI.
I mean, what you say just proves that in many respects there's nothing new under the sun. I mentioned it before. You'll know exactly what I mean when I say it. But even from the dawn of time, from before computers, I mean, garbage in, garbage out.
Absolutely.
If your data is not accurate, then don't expect to get correct answers. So that's yes, you say it's not sexy, but I mean it's probably the foundation that underlies everything else. Yeah.
So two things really are key, right? Data, and the second thing is integration. As much as we talk about integration as not being sexy, you would have seen Salesforce recently acquired MuleSoft. Well, the reason they acquired it is because integration is still key. If you can't connect two systems together and get them to talk to each other,
then you're still siloed, and you're trying to, and all this digital transformation is supposed to be knocking down all these silos.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we wouldn't be going through all this if silos didn't exist. So, look, all of these are the strategies of today, and obviously they build upon the shoulders of the strategies of yesterday and years before that brought us to where we are today. So, but what is a sneak peek that you think might be some of the strategies of tomorrow? And looking sort of further into the future, I mean, what might 2028, a decades hence, look like if you peer into that crystal ball?
Yeah, pretty juicy question, because it's very hard to predict what's going to happen, right?
I mean, Yogi Berra said predictions are hard to make, especially about the future.
Yeah, look, I think, taking that same theme of AI, at the moment we kind of think of AI as being humans and machines as two discrete things.
Yeah.
I think as we go through the next few years, we'll see the boundaries between the two start to blur significantly. A lot of the research that's coming out right now around when they've used kind of AI and machine learning models and then paired it with a human, particularly in the medical field, what they've found is that if a person is kind of above 90% accuracy and an AI model that's predicting a disease or a symptom is about greater than 90% accurate, if you put those two together, you get something like 98%, over 98% accuracy. And we're starting to see that whole beautiful interweaving of machines and intelligence really start to take shape a lot more. The other thing is also, just earlier this year, we launched a report at Davos, at the World Economic Forum, that really looked at future of work. What does work look like for a lot of these large industries? And the interesting thing that came out of that was most people, so about 67% of people that were surveyed out of that, were really keen and really impatient to start working with AI. And about 45% of them actually thought that their work could be improved using things like AI and machine learning models. So as much as there's a lot of hype in the media right now around, is a machine's going to take over, and things like that, what we're finding on the ground is that people actually want to use AI to help make their lives and jobs better. The interesting thing though is not just that part, but when we asked kind of the executives of some of these larger companies what they were expecting to spend in terms of training spend over the next couple of years, we found that only about 3% of them were really expecting to increase their training spend. And that to me is kind of the gap in the market, right? As jobs change and the nature of jobs changes, really a lot of organizations need to start thinking about, well, how do you retrain people? How do you get them to kind of pivot to the future and create those jobs of the future? And it's a big problem across the globe, across a lot of our organizations, governments, all the way down to the schooling.
Yes, otherwise we'll end up with a lot of AI technicians, or we've got to figure out ways of getting AI to sort of train the trainer.
That's right, exactly right.
Now, to change gears for a bit as we get to the second to last question of the interview, I always like to ask the people I'm interviewing if they could please share the best piece of advice that you've received to help you get where you are today.
Yeah, so I think I've been in Accenture sort of when I started off as a grad, and the best piece of advice that I got when I first started was don't be afraid to try anything. Yeah. So in my career in Accenture, I've kind of done lots of different things, but I probably haven't done the same thing for more than kind of 6 months to a year, and I've tried lots of different areas. And the reason I think that's helped me is because as industry and technology has changed significantly, and especially the last couple of years, we're seeing that change even more rapid. That ability to relearn, be adaptable and malleable, I think has become extremely valuable. So anytime there's sort of new grads or uni students that I go out and talk to, I tell them, hey, don't be afraid. What you're learning to do is relearn and adapt rather than the substance of what you learn. And I think that's a big shift in the market. That's something that's going to hit us all. It's going to start every day, everything, from the beginning, from the time you start at school, through to uni, through to industry. How do you make people adapt and learn? And that's not a natural thing for most people to be able to do.
Sure. And so what's your final message to ITY viewers and readers and to your current and future customers and partners? Yeah,
so one of the underlying themes that we talk about quite a bit in the Tech Vision this year is this concept of redefine your company based on the company you keep. We talked a little bit about this when we talked about the Facebook example, is this idea of creating a corporate social contract. So if you look at Australian businesses, they have a lot of, trusted partnerships within their ecosystem as well as with their customers. And that ability to, publish a social contract that says, here's what I stand for, here's how I'm going to help you as a customer or an employee, and here's how I'm going to enrich your life or make it better. I think that's become real key. And I think Australian businesses have the ability to use that concept, really go out to the market and say, here's how I'm going to use your data, and kind of flip the switch on the way that some of the global giants are doing and say, well, here's how I'm going to treat you as a customer or an employee, and create that social contract to create that unique experience. I think that's really the key message that we want to get out this year.
Well, Harshu Deshpande, Managing Director of Accenture Technology, thank you very much for your time.
No problem. Thank you, Alex.
And looking forward to Technology Division 2019 next year.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you very much.